Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today is Lightning Talks. Actually, this is the most important meetup as far as me and CJ goes, because the whole purpose of doing all these other meetups is to get everybody talking, everybody exploring the world on their own energetically and interacting with each other at a very deep level. So what we are going to do, and this is going to be a periodic thing, I'm going to do this, I'm planning to do this once a month. So that way, everybody, you get to know people of seeing what is it that they are exploring. There is going to be tremendous cross-fertilization of ideas. So what we're going to do is that we're going to take turns. You have about 5 minutes. I won't be too strict on time this time, but don't take too much more than 5 minutes. And each person will get to put their thoughts on the table. And I'm keeping track of everything that everybody is saying. And I'm trying to identify themes that come through that. And after everybody is done talking, we are going to go and explore several themes that are common to everything that, everybody's saying. So I'm going to start with Maxine. Maxine, you get to go first. You always have amazing things to say. So, oh, wait a minute. CJ, would you like to do an introduction, please?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to remind people we have at least 3 new people. This is Comprehensivist Wednesdays. And comprehensivism is the practice of considering with ever increasing depth and breadth more and more of humanity's great traditions of inquiry and action, the things that we share and communicate with each other, our learnings, to better comprehend how our worlds work and how they change so we might all live more effective lives. And we do it with, frequently we have dedicated presentations, and then we do breakouts. But today we're listening to you in this lightning talk format, as Shrikant mentioned.
Wonderful. So with that, let me hand the floor to Maxine. Maxine, go ahead.
All right. When I joined this group, I had certain goals, and I knew what I wanted from the group, but I wasn't sure that I could accomplish it. You know, when you're a child, people say children should be seen but not heard. Then you're a woman, and people don't want to hear you speak either. Then you're an older woman and you have lots of advice and you've lived your whole life and no one wants to hear it. They just want you to say, oh, that's good. My mother used to say, when you can't say anything else, just say, that's interesting. Okay. My children said, we've listened to your advice. Now it's time to sit back and cheer. So every time I see them, I go, yay. But that doesn't help me retain my organizational skills or make me able to speak in some kind of a coherent manner. Because if you, especially during an epidemic, because should I speak to myself? No, well, perhaps, but I decided that I would join this group so that I could learn to express myself. Now, everybody in this group is very expressive and they can speak for 10, 20 minutes, but I wasn't able to speak more than 1 sentence. And then maybe the next week I spoke 2 sentences. And I had many thoughts and many ideas, but I couldn't communicate them. And then Joe one day said to me, you know, your ideas aren't so bad. So then I thought, well, maybe I could say 5 sentences. And soon I thought, well, I think I'll try to speak. Now, this is very difficult for me to do right now. It's very difficult. I have subject matter that I could make sound much more intelligent if it's from music or art or literature or Shakespeare. I mean, there are many subjects that I've explored, but this is very important to me at this particular time. And your ideas said we should work on what will improve us. Now, I especially the Friday nights, and they said in the Friday nights, look, well, I'm a polymath in speech. I will be delighted if I can just stand up and express what's in my head. Now, I made some notes here. So this is the part where I fall apart, but I'm not going to do that. All right. Okay, I also am listening. I may not be able to have an opinion when I'm not sure you would like my opinion. So I have to get over the fact that, okay, maybe people won't like my opinion, but that doesn't mean I can't have one. And I think that's an important thing to work on. And I will continue working on these things and learning to speak. And you all will have to listen because I listen to you. And I don't always agree with what you have to say. And I'm sure you will not agree with what I have to say. But that's life. That's communication. That's the skill that I want to work on, communication. And maybe in a year from now, I won't have to have this speech because I'll be able to automatically communicate what is in my head. And that's
Wonderful.
my talk.
Wonderful, Maxine. It's always pleasure to have you here. And I especially love your stories. So I can't quite believe that you think that you were not able to speak, because it's always a pleasure listening to you. Thank you. Thank you. So folks, for those who came in late, we are, everybody is welcome to share what you're exploring for 5 minutes. After everybody has had a chance to speak, we'll look at all the themes and we're going to talk about all the themes together. Okay, so that's the plan. Next up is going to be Joe. Joe, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm currently exploring a number of topics, but I've chosen to speak about Stoicism as a philosophy of life. And the reason I've actually started to explore Stoicism as a philosophy of life is because there were a few years ago that things weren't going so well for me. I'd lost a lot of my possessions and my relationships. And what I recognized in that process, in my deepest and darkest moments, was all that I had left were my actions and my character. So what I lacked was a coherent philosophy of life that provided me with a framework for how to analyze my everyday interactions as well as analyze myself. So Stoicism is based on virtue ethics, which focuses on character. And having known how important that's all you have left when you lose possessions, this has actually been a life-saving kind of philosophy for me. Character is essential to building trust with others and understanding our roles in society. Now Stoicism, it's based on the cardinal virtues, which is actually practical wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Now, these virtues have guided my decisions throughout my life, but I never necessarily knew how to term like a coherent philosophy around them, or to think about it, how to express a specific way of living that way. The second is the dichotomy of control, which basically states, that some things are in your control while others aren't. And this has been critical for me because, and quoting Epictetus really quickly, is some things within our power while others are not. Within our power are opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, and in a word, whatever is of our own doing. Not within our power are body, property, reputation, office, and in a word, whatever is not of our own doing. And this is where I want to come back to the idea of judgments and the power, to question our own decisions, which is within our power. And I want to explore this a little bit more. Is the idea of judgments and how they're within our power and our opinions and our reason. We can reason our way to better decisions. Now, our impulses, we have the ability to exercise our self-control over our initial reactions. Now, this has actually been, while these are intuitive to some people, having a way of actually analyzing what is in our control and categorizing what is in our control has actually been a life-changing thing for me. Not in our control were the two things that I had spoken about that I had lost. The material possessions, which we can lose at any particular moment in time, and people's opinions. We're unable to control what others think. So what I recognized was that if I can follow Stoic principles, I'm hopeful that I'll have a peace of mind that will allow me to not only interact with with others more virtuously, but to help me understand myself. And so I thank you for hosting these Saturday Stoic meetups, because they've provided me with deeper insights, as well as the Stoic group that I've been dealing in Philadelphia. So that's what I've been exploring for this period of time.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much. And it's always great to have you come. It just adds a lot of continuity and kind of continuity of conversation to actually keep talking to the same people over a period of time. You get to see the kind of full range of thoughts and kind of commonalities of their views across thoughts. So that's really great. So next up is going to be Jean, Deborah, and John. Jean, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, so I want to share, I'm really grateful to find this group. So I think it's quite interesting. I'm not religious, but I read one of the sentences that you will find what you look for. You will, basically something like you seek, you will find. You look, you will see. So I found that it's quite fortunate. I started my self-development journey with Landmark Forum. And the reason is I had my own business as an architect entrepreneur, and I have 2 kids. And I live in the Belleville with a lot of suburbs. And I really get bored. It's like all the mom around me, they're interested in flowers, cakes, coffees. And when we get together, I love them. They are very nice and friendly, but they just don't want to talk the topic I'm interested. So once I joined the Landmark training, it really opened up my self-development journey. I actually joined the skydiving with the group. And it's really one of the things I really want to do on my list, but I never have time to get into it. So it's also later on, after I joined this group, I understand, the psychological base of that training. It's all about subconsciousness. It's about that something that automatically control us, we don't understand. So we are talking about, what you know what you don't know, but you don't know what you don't know. I finally understand what this means. So this learning with this group is just phenomenal, especially when I learned I'm Polymath, which explains why I'm interested in so many topics. I don't really see a lot of people at my age, like these young kids in this group. I either see younger people or older people who seem to have more time to explore themselves. But that's why I want to write this book. I want to say it's important to do the self-exploration at any age. And I read this book yesterday. It's called Live and Examine Life. And it said, the best gift you can give to your kids to fully live your life, because then you give your permission to your kids to fully live their lives. So I don't believe in sacrifice. You know, I do my best for my kids, but I do it for my own benefit as well, because I learn so much from them. That's why I encourage everybody to have kids, because that's the best challenge you can have to grow yourself. I learned nutrition recently because my kids are allergic to a lot of things. I joined nutrition program. I learned so much about food and health. It's just amazing. And the reason I joined Landmark, because I think my older son is not motivated. I try to motivate himself. And they said, if you want to send your kids, you have one of your parents have to join the training. And my husband and me, we both joined. And we learned so much from that. So, and this stop for me, join this group, is one of very important stuff, because this opened up so much doors, meditation, philosophy, and I have to say, it's benefiting every area of my life. I just talked with my client today, and she wanted to design a new house for her. And she said, oh, I don't know what the house look like. Should it look like my neighbor's house? I said, no, your house is your self-expression. It's the expression of your family. So you have to express yourself. It's like a clothes, it's bigger. So don't look like your neighbors. I think the reason we have so many houses look so similar, because most people didn't find their personality. They don't express themselves. If we have more people develop their ego, understand their self-expression of their house, we will have much better house in the city. We have much beautiful city. So I strongly encourage everybody, don't forget to develop yourself, no matter how busy you are. It will help in every area of your life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean. It's always wonderful to have you here, and it's the range of topics. You know, it's like you're a mom, you're an architect, you're a businesswoman, and you're always studying all kinds of things. So it's really wonderful to have all those perspectives. And I think for me, it is, you know, just, you know, people like you folks that make it all worthwhile, because each day, each person puts something on the table, something new on the table. Sometimes you're familiar with it, but they bring it from a different angle. So thank you very much. Next up is Deborah. Deborah, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So I want to talk about my interest in the turn of the last century and the university extension movement in the UK and the US for adult liberal education. And one of the things I've been interested in is why in the UK it was much more rigorous at that time period than the US. So just a little bit of background. So in the late 19th century, places like Oxford and Cambridge were being reformed to allow dissenters to come in. They were liberalizing the curriculum from just the classics to more modern topics and so on. And part of this movement was also to go out to working class areas to give tutorials, and which led to many of the people who took these tutorials went on to in leadership positions in the labor movement. And when you look at what these tutorials were like, they would have a class of, you know, they were elites in the working classes, but they really, you know, they were working 12-hour days. I mean, and they met for 3 years at a time, and they wrote essays once every 2 weeks. You know, and these were people, you know, working in a coal mine or potter's wheel or whatever it was just amazing. And in the US, there were idealists who tried to copy this model in the US, but what happened realistically was that, you know, in the US, the courses would be much shorter, much more popular. You know, they never really achieved in the US what was possible in the UK. And so one of my questions for some time has been, you know, why is that? And the answer is really complicated, but one of the reasons is because the US was so dominated by industrialists, and we had more of a plutocracy that didn't allow, so in the UK, you had, the elites were bonded together, different types of elites, not just the economic elites, but you had economic elites, political elites, intellectual elites, in many ways in one circle. So someone from Oxford, an academic from Oxford, would be close with those, in politics or economic spheres. And those people, there was a much wider range of politics that was acceptable. So you could be a socialist, probably not a radical socialist, but a democratic socialist, and still be in those elite circles. And so some of the people that went to these working class areas, like R.H. Tawney especially, he was still, he studied classics at Oxford, he was in elite circles, but he was able to go to have those views and not be outside of government or outside of the Church of England and so on. Whereas in the US and many other countries, you would be outside of those circles working on socialist issues. And I think because of this also, when you read the accounts of the working classes that were part of these tutorial movements, like they really demanded the same standards that were at Oxford. They really wanted this. So some of the critiques of it that they were imposing, Oxford was imposing upon people, but when you read the accounts, the people themselves really wanted this for themselves, and especially for leadership in the labor movement. So anyway, I apologize for the length of this, but that's a sort of broad overview of some of my interests.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Deborah, and welcome to the meetup. Next up is going to be John, Jenny, and Mike. John, go ahead.
Thank you, Shrikant. Yeah, so I think I'm going to talk about something related to the thing I said I was going to talk about, which was systems thinking. And I've sort of become interested in systems thinking lately. And it's something that's sort of not really all that popular, but I feel like it applies to so many different areas of life. And you can sort of apply it to anything. You can apply it to people, you can apply it to governments, you could apply it to your house, you could apply it to phenomena of nature. And there's some universal phenomena that happen with it that I'm hoping to be able to leverage in different aspects of my life. I sort of talked about, I mentioned earlier I was interested in sort of incremental improvements or incremental efforts. And there's sort of ideas of momentum and beats and how a system reacts, and understanding the dynamics of a system can be very beneficial in being able to make that system function optimally. Because once you start knowing how a system works, you can kind of start to see, oh, maybe throwing just more effort at it isn't necessarily the best way. For instance, like when you go to the gym, they often say when you first start going, don't overdo it because you're going to wear yourself out, right? Or you may get discouraged. They sort of want you to work up to it. And so rather than, hitting that system of physical fitness with, everything you have, it's usually better to build a repetitive but stable amount of effort. And so things like that I found are pretty interesting. And just like a side note, so I sort of happened upon this really neat, this phenomena with systems, and this sort of what started getting me interested. I bought like a piece of charcoal, like water filtration charcoal, and I had 2 of them. And it's just a thing you can buy. You put it in water and you let it sit for like a couple of hours, and it's like a Brita thing, but so you put the charcoal in there. And I remembered I never really liked the Brita filters because they would always sort of run out of water and then I have to wait to refill it. And I thought it was annoying. So I don't know, by happenstance, I actually bought 2 pitchers of water, and I filled up both of them and put them in there. And what's happened is that like when one, so I have two, maybe about 2 liters each. When I use one and it sort of empties out, I immediately fill it up and put it behind the second one. And for some reason, because the system is self-organizing, I've never run out of water in like the 2 years I've had it. The system sort of just perpetuates itself. And I just thought it was an interesting phenomenon that I don't have to put any effort into it, and it sort of self-organizes. And so I'm just sort of interested in sort of setting up self-organizing systems that perpetuate themselves. And yeah, that's about it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, John. Next up is Jenny. Jenny, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to preface what I'm working on with something. My approach to comprehensive learning, I think any one of us, if I've always been curious and I love learning, the excitement of learning something new, discovery. And so that's taken me into both the arts and sciences. While I majored in the arts and humanities, I was also interested in chemistry and physics and mathematics, and even as hobbies, astronomy, cosmology, economic, and then later in life now, right? I had to invest my retirement savings. So I spent 2 years learning about investing before I invested. And actually I found economics fascinating and political science now. So as long as I think we all have that capability, and philosophy. If we're curious and we love learning, it's going to take us in many directions. Now what I'm working on is the following. Lao Tzu said, mastering, although I don't think you can master others, mastering others is strength, but mastering yourself is true power. And the pandemic, since we're all the isolation of it, right, even though I'm creating art and doing all this other stuff, is confronting me with me. So why not? And that's the hardest thing to do. So both for survival, because Darwin said it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the most adaptable, right? So I'm tired of being stressed all the time. So, and of course there's going to be stress. So using my mindfulness practice, okay, of many years, I'm taking it off the cushion and using it in everyday activities. I'm not always successful. It's not about being perfect. I'm also confronting things in myself, like the pain of a lot of loss, a lot of family members' loss, and dealing with that, accepting it, and it's a journey, right? Backwards and forwards. I'm also seeing that with the pandemic, I've had a lot of both pain, fear, and anger. So I'm looking at those things. It doesn't mean I'm not feeling those things, but now in order to survive this thing, right? Because it's going to go on a year, 2 years, whatever, we don't know. So I'm also looking at working on embracing uncertainty. So the main thing is daily, right? For survival and to enjoy my best life, because I don't know when there'll be an end, because this is the life I have right now. I'm confronting everything that comes up, and I'm also learning to change my behavior where I've always been very harsh, because I've had a very, growing up, I made amends with my family. My father was very verbally abusive, and I was harsh to myself. Guess what? I'm learning to be kind, to be nurturing, to comforting. And these are huge steps for me. Had it not been, in some ways, the pandemic has forced this. So I'm learning from the circumstances that we are all in. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Thank you. Next up is going to be Mike, Brian, and Stella. Mike, go ahead.
Well, since the book expose we did last week worked so well, I picked a good book as my base for today's exercise. And the book I picked was a book by Garry Kasparov, the former Russian world universe grand champion at chess. and he wrote a book with the title Deep Thinking, and the subtitle Where Machine Intelligence Ends and Human Creativity Begins. Now, he was not just a champion chess player. He was a researcher in the field of AI at universities and companies on 3 continents. He also was one of the few people who ran and did an extensive campaign for president of all places, Russia, and lived to tell about it. Not many people, that was one of the Putin's campaign strategies that, well, he didn't win anyway, but he learned a lot. The book talks about how the human mind works and learns individually and how it works and learns collectively. Interestingly, he also defined in his campaign how Vladimir Putin's mind worked too, in very explicit, somewhat brash, unkind terms. He also defined how the politics and econometrics of Russia, the Warsaw Pact, excuse me, Warsaw Pact and NATO's mind work together, and why Russia is Russia basically over the last 2,000 years, including what happened with the Warsaw Pact, Byzantium, Gaul, and China. The first version of his AI machine that was called Larry, and he worked with IBM on this thing, and Kasparov could beat Larry regularly, and Larry was a group of big computers with that were driven by the best chess players that IBM could hire. The second one was called Fritz, and he could do that. Could beat him occasionally. The third was called Big Blue, and it got to the point where it could beat Kasparov regularly, no matter how hard Kasparov tried. But he had decided while it could beat him regularly, the game of chess is so complex that it could not, that if you take some other grandmaster, even one that Kasparov could beat, it may not be able to beat that guy, and without some retraining. And that's probably just sessions away. And the reason why is that chess is chess is a mathematically infinite game. It's and we talked about Gödel, Eschel, and Bach in one of our sessions, and it may be NP complete, but it's still infinite. The number of legal moves is more than the number of atoms in the solar system. So the machine can't solve the game. Like say, if you do King's Pawn 2 to King's Pawn 4, if you could solve the game, you could say something, make a statement like, I can guarantee checkmate in 16,000 moves or something like that. Machines can't yet do that yet. They can keep track of 7 moves ahead, but not with 8 pieces, but not the start, but not the general solution. If it's not all predetermined, this means we're not going to be able to, we may not ever be able to solve these things perfectly. My takeaway out of all this is that if for those who are chess players, and if you're going to be a grand master, the King's Gambit, which most of us learn in high school, is not really usable against the professional anymore. Not even as an opening move, but the old games won't work. He also decided that Russia is Russia because because how the mind of NATO in the West works. Russia is between NATO on the west, Islam on the south, and China on the east, and the Arctic Circle on the north. And so that geography has kind of biased the mind of Russia, the economics of Russia, the warfare of Russia, and the politics of Russia. And you got Putin in the middle, so that gave a problem which he thought he could solve if he had gotten elected as premier of Russia, which he didn't do. He's now alive and well and commuting between his home in the Crimea, which is a very stable place right now, and a home in New York. So, and I think I can yield the balance of my time and didn't use all of my 5 minutes yet.
Impressive, impressive, Mike. Thank you, Mike. Next up is, it's going to be Brian, Stella, Dave, Gary, Paul, Jeff, William, CJ, and Shrikant. Brian, go ahead.
Hi, okay. Well, instead of picking something particular area to talk through, I just made a list of the things I'm up to now. The important thing to note is, and all of my life, my working career was a very heavy technical career. When I left university, I spent a few years in computer design, and then support and sales. I moved into business management and I worked for 10 years developing or assisting in developing European civil aviation systems, and then moved into meteorological satellite systems. And there was no time really for much else in all of that. It was purely technical, traveling a lot, working all over Europe, very, very difficult. That ended when I had a rather massive heart attack. And I decided to make a change in my life. So me and my wife and I, we decided she had always wanted to go home. Home for her was the Dominican Republic. So we moved back there and I started a plan of action. My plan of action comprised really looking at all the art forms that I'd ignored most of my life. Music, I'd always been a guitarist, if not a very good one. So I decided to improve on that. I also started taking violin lessons and studying classical music. I moved into painting. Again, I'd always been really interested in art, but couldn't even draw a straight line without a ruler. But I've moved on there now. I've got a lot of work, which has not been shown yet, but is planned to be shown, mainly in sketches, pastels, and acrylic painting. So I'm working hard on developing that. Poetry. I make sure that I write at least one poem every day, sometimes more. I've had some poems published in the UK in specialist magazines, and I'm working on developing my own pamphlet for publish later next year probably. I also do a lot of creative writing. I am 3/4 of the way through what I would term a memoir, which is includes a lot more than what I've already talked. It particularly talks about my early life. I've also got 2 novels, half complete. So I have difficulty finishing things, but I keep going on and on and on. Philosophy, I've always spent a lot of time in philosophy, even though I was working. I studied Vedanta philosophy for a long time, as well as the Fourth Way. Platonic and Aristotelian works I studied quite a lot. I've now expanded that. I've gone quite heavily into Stoicism, but also very interested in the empiric documentation as well. So I study quite a lot in that area. Literature I've moved into as well. I'm studying European literature. I always was very proud of myself when people ask me what I read, to say that I never read any fiction. It's all non-fiction that I read. That's now changed, and I've got a lot of catching up to do, and that's about it. So.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Brian. It's quite a range. Next up is Stella. Stella, go ahead.
Hi. This is my first time, so I'm a little nervous. But let's see. I have been thinking about how to help people connect virtually, and how to create experiences online that will allow people to interact and connect and to feel like they belong to a sense of community. And so I run my own meetup, but I'm also creating an event I work with my city attorney's office as a mediator. And so I decided to put on a gathering for all of us mediators to basically get together and to collaborate online, because I think mediators are, I mean, at least the ones in my office, are so fascinating because they come from all walks of life. I myself have I'm a yoga teacher. I've been practicing yoga. I have a meditation background. And so I've always been fascinated those tools and that knowledge into conflict resolution and to further peace in their own communities, because I think as mediators, we're also community leaders. And all of this is volunteer. So we're a bunch of volunteer mediators. And so I think that even takes more dedication and even more conviction in our purpose as mediators to bring peace to our communities. So I've been working on a project of how to bring us all together so that we can basically create more community, create more connection with each other, and to collaborate. And I kind of see us as like bees and cross-pollinating what our knowledge is and being able to share who we are as people. That's also something that I've been really interested in, is how to be more authentic in how I relate to others and how I bring authenticity to gatherings, and how to create a space where people can freely express themselves.
Well, wonderful. I think you came to the right place. And, we do these meetups every day, and we have a community. So let us know what you think of our community, and we would welcome you as a part of the community with open arms. Okay, so it's wonderful to have you here. Thanks. And I really admire, it's like that's what we are trying to do here, both CJ and I, because we just as a aside, I had in-person community in New York, meeting every Saturday. We would get between 30 to 80 people. When COVID happened, I didn't want to lose that, so I moved it online. And suddenly people from all over the US and all over the world started showing up. So it's amazing. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Next up, thanks. Next up, let me see here. Next up is Dave, followed by Gary and Paul. So Dave, go ahead.
Thanks, Shrikant. And CJ, good to see you again. And I guess I'll start by putting in a plug for comprehensivism, if I could just say it. But I've really enjoyed working on broadening my knowledge and exposure to different areas. And I was really so happy to run into 52 Living Ideas in Shrikant's little college he's running here. And I've been hitting just about every night of the week. And everything is fascinating. But in other areas, I love documentaries, and CJ and I disagree on that a little bit. I'm in the nonfiction world, which he says doesn't exist, but public broadcasting system and CNN, especially love Ken Burns specials on country music and the national parks. And I'm very interested when you get in this deep areas and exploration to start to see connections. I've watched an excellent documentary on the First World War, and then that ties into the Spanish flu, which of course ties into this wonderful flu or virus or what heck it is we're doing now. But the First World War also ties into the Dust Bowl, which I was kind of familiar with coming from Kansas. So to me it's fascinating. I love Jordan Peterson now that I've been exposed to him, and I'm now trying to plow through maps of meaning, and I'm lucky to get through 5 or 10 pages. And if I have an hour to set aside for some reading, which is really what was fascinating and brought me into this in the first place, because I started to read some Carl Jung about 20 years ago, and I got about halfway through a book and hit a brick wall of maps, Man and Symbol, I think was his book. Like I say, it was just so deep. And it's funny, people will say, "Oh, you like Jung? Oh, read this book. It's so simple." And I said, "Oh my God." But when I first started about 6 months ago, I think it was now, Shrikant, there was a series on Carl Jung, and I was hoping it would go on forever. It was so interesting to hear people talk about him and his ideas and all of our personalities and shadows and everything else. So I've been enjoying this journey, and it's filled up my time. First, I thought I had all this free time, but it's getting filled up with all the homework and reading and everything else. But I'm really enjoying the journey. So thanks to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Always appreciate having you here. Next up is Gary, Paul, and Jeff. Gary, go ahead.
Okay. My topic is on auctioneering, and I'll give a little bit of a story. So in school, we had a handful of field trips we went on, and those were big days. It was a place where you could, experience a total environment firsthand and get a chance to look around. And as an adult, those field trips are kind of closed off to you. You don't get to go look and see places of the world you're not allowed. And I thought, how can I get this proxy experience a little bit different than, you might as a field trip, but fulfill my curiosity. And I thought, well, if I go into auctioning events, as if I'm a buyer, I get access where I can look around these facilities, inspect and see what's happening, take photos, and spend as much time as I want to observe the environment. And auctions often last 4 to 12 hours, which is more than enough time to look around places. Many people think auctions are just household junk or artwork, and that's about it. But there's an entire world of businesses and organizations that falter for whatever reason, or close or move to new locations, and you can go in and see what those total environments were the moment somebody left. And it also answered some questions because there's so many markets out there. So I explored as many markets as I could. And some of the questions that I answered was, how does the price of a cow drop to 1 cent on the auction block and still nobody will buy it? What happens to your car after the total insurance loss? What happens after a vehicle is repossessed by the bank that still has your soccer equipment, the photos, and the cigarettes in the ashtray? Why during COVID, when there were no potatoes on the store shelf, could I buy a 50-pound bag for $2? What happens when your next of kin dies? When you die, you have no next of kin, and the state comes in to close out your life. You basically sell your life by the pound. And I watched auctioneers as a business. Think of the speed that people go through a self-checkout lane. In slightly a little bit longer than that speed, an auctioneer can present an item, describe it, take increasing bids, strike the hammer, deliver it to the person sitting in the audience, and record the winner every 16 seconds for an hour straight. How do they do that? And that came by sitting in the audience. In places where it was okay and comfortable, I would try and stand behind the auctioneer or obliquely off to the side and watch all of the people that were moving, what was going on, how the audience was responding, how they're preparing to make this whole process of people and things and information move around a building. Some of the challenges that I took on myself was to take in the objects in the environment, the pictures, and then when they're somebody's houses, view it like an anthropologist might, that I get to see somebody's total life for 4 hours and observe the pictures on the walls, the objects in their house, the things that they collected, how they maintain their place. I got to explore some places that I was never be able to. A turbine power plant, an Amish dairy farm. I got to climb inside of commercial vehicles, like inside of a dairy tanker, a refrigerator unit, car carrier, ice cream truck, different things like that. And I got to see places of life that wouldn't be otherwise. So when places are condemned or put on the auction block, I got to see what the inside of a flop hotel was, including the awful walls and the missing carpet and people's drawing on the walls. And then for products that are sold new, one of those is I got a lot of experience was the USDA, which basically is agricultural products. You got to understand by sitting there and watching and reviewing public reports, how are things priced? And then I put a challenge to myself. Could I understand the market well enough to make a guesstimate? So one of them was I picked hay, and I went around and looked at all 20 loads, and I said, I think this is the top winner. And I kind of wrote it down to myself. And then I waited until all 20 loads were, and I was so excited that the load I picked wound up being the highest price for that day. And so I had said I had done a circular of the knowledge that, you know, I tested it out and then proved it. Similar with beef cattle, I was understood how the pricing for it works. It's really quite interesting. And some of the people that I met the president of an auctioneers association, and they admitted you really got to know your product, as they tried to sell an automotive tool as a beauty aid, and the audience had to correct them and laugh because they just didn't know what they were dealing with, and that's just part of the business. Why would somebody spend $600 on a box of apples? And that wasn't one person. They were bidding their way up, and that's something where you have agricultural excellence, and people want to show off their product. Nearing the end of time, so I'll go ahead and clear up. If this is something you want to do, you definitely can. You just need to look around and just look at it first. Don't try and bid or buy, understand what's happening. But you definitely have a lot of opportunities to explore. And I wrote down beforehand, I've gone to 30 different businesses I never would have gotten into. And I mean, that's hundreds of hours worth of exploration and further understanding about how the world works. And I'll go ahead and give one more second. One bid it now, two bid it now, three bid it now, four do I hear five? I've got 5 minutes. Thank you. I'm done.
Oh, wonderful. That was wonderful. Thank you, Gary. Really appreciate it. It's a very unusual topic. That's very fascinating. Next up is going to be Paul, Jeff, CJ, and Shrikant. Paul, go ahead.
Okay, I'm not sure if it's a good idea for me to speak, but anyway, I will try. I think that I am a little bit polymath thanks to the socialist government in former Czechoslovakia, because I always wanted to study literature and history, and certainly that I couldn't because of the socialist system over there, which was there. So I went to engineering. That helped me when I finally escaped jump the fence, literally jumped the fence to Austria in 1984, and I came to Canada and to West. After couple years of licenses, I was hired in one of the big local companies as maintenance engineer. And after 2 days, I realized that they are pushing me that I have to join the union. So then I remember like today, I was 26, I believe, and they said, why did I jump the fence to West to freedom if I have to join the union? So I quit that job and opened my business. Thanks to that, I become financially independent, but I was always studying and trying to study history more and more, and philosophy more and more, and literature more and more. So, but in the meantime, I was still working through my business in my engineering, civil engineering and electrical engineering. So so I always, so that financial independence got me to thinking, why, if I am able to do it and live on my own and jump the fence and enjoy the freedom which we had here, why the people are so much depending on government, on their payments, on their work, on anything? Why they are becoming more and more like the system I escaped from? And basically my way of living and my what I am trying to do, explain to everybody that political system and freedom which we have here, we have to protect. Please, everybody, think government is not the solution, never was and never will be. It is real danger and it's coming. If we allow government to take over our political and economic life, we will lose everything what we have here. Please, everybody, protect that. I don't mind anybody who is on left or right if it's within the law, but protect the freedom for please, everybody. You should come with this. You are allowing everybody to speak their mind. It's unbelievably honorable. But I'm saying, I'm asking everybody, try to protect that. If we will listen only to government, it's over. I'm telling you, it's over.
Thank you, Paul. I think that freedom is critical, and I think freedom of speech and freedom of expression is a foundation of it. So I think, I'm completely with you regarding freedom, and I think freedom of speech is, and the thing I like about, I know that you can be very cantankerous at times, but the thing is that I respect people who have lived through a different system and actually know the consequences of it for the life. And in many ways, people in America have had it very easy. And so they don't see the consequences of some of the things. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Next up is Jeff.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Shrikant. Thank you for that, Paul. It's great to hear from you. I was just kind of, brainstorming what I might do with this evening, and I wanted to do something that is consistent with our orientation to taking comprehensivist approaches to possibly challenging and maybe current issues. And I actually had the experience today of conducting a training session for leadership and executive coaches in the United States on the subject of 5 dimensions of racism. So I thought that might be an interesting subject to bring to this evening. So I'll do this very concisely, and it will be incomplete, but it will be hopefully hitting the main points. So the first dimension of racism is really in each of us in our relationship with ourselves. And for those of us who have lived a life distinguished by varying levels of white privilege in the United States, and all of its sort of dimensions and benefits and drawbacks, and that there is a remarkable self-awareness that we can gain by exploring our attitudes and beliefs about ourselves and our experiences, and how they come about. In the work that I've done with regard to racial justice, racial healing, and racial sensitivity programs, there is also a dimension for especially people of color in the United States. It's characterized by what's called internalized oppression, where people, after listening and experiencing and seeing in the culture and seeing in the media and in kind of every dimension, begin to take on the attitudes of feeling less than or feeling hesitant to join in, or struggling with confidence, struggling with an imposter syndrome, a variety of different things. So the first dimension is in our relationship with ourselves. The second dimension is in our relationship with others directly. Sometimes in relationships that are, say, pairs, when a one-on-one, sometimes our relationships within groups. And two things to be aware of that is, one, you've all heard the phrase unconscious bias. It is a remarkably consistent thing among human beings. It's been demonstrated by many social science experiments. And it really is, it is a very unfortunate thing that we need to work our way through, whether we come at it from people who have been, from a white privilege perspective, or from an internalized oppression standpoint. But it has for folks of color in relating to folks who are beneficiaries of white privilege, there's just a level of suspicion and a hesitancy to trust, and a hesitancy to believe, and to believe in sort of the honor that someone will do the right thing no matter what, and that is always a part of our relationships and our culture in the United States, and something to be taken seriously. And give ourselves feedback, give each other feedback on it, so that then we can not only be aware of it, but can influence it and manage it in ourselves, as well as take it into account and do whatever we can to overcome it in our relationships with each other. But for the most part, when we think of racism, we think of it in those two ways, sort of, white privilege, unconscious bias, internalized oppression, and sort of suspicion. But there are really three other levels of racism. And those are institutional, systemic, and structural. Institutional is where you can look inside of a company or a university or a church or a hospital or a business, and you can say, okay, I get it. I can look at this. I can see who is consistently picked to be in the leadership roles. I can see ways that the company operates, and I can say, okay, in probably a combination of unconscious and potentially conscious ways, there are racist things going on here. But secondly, in what's referred to as systemic, and you hear this a lot. Systemic means across institutions, across companies, across churches, across religious institutions, in an entire field or in an entire sector, whether it might be technology, finance, medicine, entertainment and movies, education, where you look at this and you see, okay, look at that. How many people of color do you see in leading technology companies? How many people of color do you see, as CEOs of Fortune 500 companies? And you say, okay, this is not just within an individual institution. This is actually across many institutions in the same field. And that's what people mean when they say systemic. Now, structural is another word you hear a lot, and it's really often, I find, misused, because people don't have enough of an education to really understand it. Structural is where you look across an entire society, and you see things like everything from educational attainment to income to incarceration to wealth to health to all measures of quality of life, longevity, all kinds of things. And you say, okay, look at that. In all these different fields and sectors and systems, this seems to show up. And as the great management theorist from Stanford used to say, culture eats systems for breakfast. And the degree of racism in a culture will show up across many systems and within institutions and between people and even within people in ways that we may be more or less aware and may be more or less committed to seeking to overcome. So those are the 5 dimensions, and we found that they are very useful to be aware of in just understanding what's going on and what people are trying to work our way through and get to a better place. There you go.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Frankly, I'm quite overwhelmed by the range of presentations. They're just amazing. And what I want to do is, in order to kind of foster many-to-many dialogue, as soon as the presentations are over, so it's going to be William, CJ, and me, everybody gets to ask one question to one other person, okay? So if you want to line up for asking questions, just type !! In the chat. And try to keep the questions and answers brief because we want to cover as many as possible. So next up is William. William, go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna do a quick screen share. Oh, are we not allowed to do screen sharing?
Sorry, we're trying to keep it short. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, can I?
Do you want to do screen share?
Yeah, it's just gonna be for a few minutes.
Okay, give me just a second.
So a little bit about myself. My name is William Mock. A lot of what I'm trying to do in my adult life comes from my own experiences growing up. When I was 12, I spent a lot of my time online. I taught myself to program. I did a lot of game mods and hacks in the early 2000s. Then as I got into high school, I started a film club. All of us were just making short films for the first time. We taught ourselves to edit, direct, act, script write, even compose the music to our own videos. That all ended once high school graduated. Everyone went their separate ways to college. And then, is the screen share working? Yes, okay. So this was our little group in high school. One of the things that was most interesting to me and shaped who I am today is that even though we had no experience going in, this was what we accomplished in 2 years. So we did everything, including the website, the coding, the video, graphics, marketing. We kind of prided ourselves as people who did everything. We had a little manifesto where even though we're a filmmaking group, we would do crazy things like building bots that predicted the stock market. Which leads me to what I did later in college. I actually went ahead and took that even further and started a program called Tech Trader. That has been running for about 7 years now. It's kind of bizarre because at the time I thought everybody in the industry did this, so it was nothing special. But once I graduated college and I started networking a lot more and trying to find other people with similar projects, I found that people generally didn't believe that something like this could exist, or they took a different route. They were more interested in the academic side of it, but they didn't want to put their life on the line, so to speak. So I went out and started giving talks on what I did just to try to bring more people in, maybe attract the right people that understand what I'm doing or have done something similar. Some of the presentations I've given are linked here under creating sentient artificial intelligence. It's also a high-level description of what I want to do in the long run. I believe that what I built with the trading system, I can generalize it into something that could be an AI for outside of just the financial markets. But it's different from what most other people are doing. A good example is the support and trendline system. So typically a quantitative analysis approach or a machine learning approach would try to be more statistical. They have a look back window. They try to draw lines based on past data. But the way I went about it is imagine you have a chalkboard that's just covered in white chalk and you took an eraser that was as wide as the chalkboard and you just started scrubbing up and down, depending on where the price went. The areas that you scrub the most would have the least chalk, and the chalk that's left over on the whiteboard would form lines. And those are your support and resistance lines. Interestingly enough, when you do it this way, the computation is extremely cheap because you're only doing one pass. You're simulating a chalkboard as opposed to constantly looking back 30 days or recalculating a bunch of metrics and stats. So that's been a point of difficulty just because most people do it the other way when I try to meet with AI or machine learning people. Another point of interest is the general AI that I want to do longer term. So this is kind of a high level of how I approach my system and what I want to do as the version 2. Most machine learning that's out there only focuses on the sensory inputs. So stuff like deep learning, classification algorithms, what they're good at is they're good at being the eyes to your data. They don't think about the data. They just help you see it, recognize cats, etc. There's a second class of algorithms that are more decision-making, but they're not good at handling a lot of data. So a very obvious thing to do would be to connect one to the other. Something that's good at seeing to something that's not good at handling a lot of pixels or data, but can make decisions. But even if you do it that way, what you're lacking is something that can look forward. Because if you just had these two components, it would just constantly react on what it sees, but doesn't plan or think about the future, what it wants, etc. So the way I approached that problem was there could be a third component. You could call it the subconscious, the dreaming component, or whatever's in the back of your mind that would constantly simulate the environment around you to try to float ideas to the decision-making component. So speaking in a very metaphoric sense, you would then have the mind, the subconscious, and then the body. So that's what I want to do longer term. And this is all on the website for what I'm doing. Of course, the difficulty part is finding the right people. And the way I'm going about that right now is I started a company that, I started a company that essentially is premised on top of being run by AI. Some people call it an autonomous company, or there's been a lot of buzzwords over the years. High level is just that since I have the stock trading system and the AI running in the background, essentially the people that are in the company can focus on creative endeavors. So far, it's been kind of hard to explain to people and kind of hard to find the right people. What I've found over the years is that most people just want a salary job. They want something that's stable, predictable, set schedule. Even if they say they want something that's like very adventurous or entrepreneurial, they want something where there are guidelines or like things that have been researched, or there's something to reference. Whereas what I'm looking for are people that just want to go out there, kind of like my high school group, learn what you need to learn to make your ideas into reality. Let's see. And the more interesting part, I think, is that the company that I started, it's a little bit gets into the legal side of things, but it's structured as an inverted holding company. Typically, a holding company owns other companies beneath it. Each company it owns represents a project, subsidiaries, kind of like Microsoft buying out startups. But here, the startups own Microsoft. The reason I did it that way is so that people that bring their ideas or want to create things retain full ownership of what they make. Everybody owns the company, but the company doesn't own them. So that's one of the more interesting things. And I think the only reason why I'm able to get away with this is because ultimately I'm not trying to make money in this company. I'm trying to create an environment where people can just really focus on making things. But it's one thing that's pretty important to, I guess, understand is that I get a lot of people that apply or reach out thinking that this is like a Patreon, but that's the last thing we want to be. We're trying to build stuff like the general AI or ideas that otherwise couldn't get funding, but are really amazing to pursue. but we're not here as like a support system for artists, or even, you know, I mean, we support the arts, but that you wouldn't join the company for that. So that's been kind of a disconnect. But yeah, so my name is William. The company I started is called Autodidactic Islands, Autodidactic Studios. Both of those go to the same website. The trading system and the AI description, you can look up at techtrader.ai. And yeah, that's what I have for now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, William. Very interesting. Next up is going to be CJ, followed by Shrikant. CJ, go ahead. If you want to take a little bit more time than 5 minutes, you're welcome to do that. CJ, you need to unmute yourself.
It shouldn't be more than 5 minutes, but we'll see how it goes. I wanted to share some thoughts about how I became a confident comprehensivist. My story is it took about 10 years. Although I've been comprehensive-minded since youth, the practice of comprehensivism isn't yet a well-supported tradition. I had no mentors, no role models, very few historical personas to reference. Reading Buckminster Fuller gave me confidence that the heterodox idea of being a comprehensivist was possible and important. How did practicing my comprehensivity become confident enough that late last year I organized Collaborating for Comprehensivism, and then starting in July, Shrikant and I have been organizing Comprehensivist Wednesdays and sometimes Sundays. For me, it developed from organizing discussion topics that I thought were important for helping myself or others, mainly through the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society, trying to understand a bit more about these topics that I felt were important. Each topic was a bit beyond the edge of my understanding. Each one I had to stretch into. At first, I organized simpler topics simply on articles or books, things I may have been familiar with, videos, free online courses, the ones that I thought seemed important for understanding the world and how it works and how our civilization works. I spent effort organizing questions to guide participants to thoroughly explore these subjects in events at the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society, so that participants could discover them for themselves. Buckminster Fuller had this idea of no pre-digested knowledge, that you discover it for yourself, that you think it through fresh each time. I conceived of it as explorations. I wanted to learn from others as much as I wanted to make sure the ideas that I thought deserved a seat at the table had a seat at the table. Frequently, I came to realize errors in my own thinking, which led me to rethink and research and explore on my own before I'd come back to the Thinking Society with another topic. The Thinking Society can be a very critical place, and none of my favorite ideas ever escaped unscathed from critique. For at least the first 5, maybe 7 years, I felt pretty flat-footed and struggled to support my ideas, mostly unsuccessfully. I thought they had value, but the critics usually probably walked away thinking they had won each event. But I was undeterred. I came back and organized follow-up topics to try to imagine thinking things through afresh from scratch, how even these skeptics might start to glean that there might be another way of interpreting the world, that that maybe their critiques weren't the only way. And even today, because I'm always exploring topics in which I have too little experience, it can frequently happen that I can't effectively respond to critics because very often I can't anticipate all the things people might say, all the nuances of a subject. But very gradually, by degrees, over the last decade, I started around 2010 organizing topics. My topic planning started to get better at anticipating the resistances and objections that participants might have. By degrees, I learned how to better formulate questions and stories that could spur reflection and rethinking, even in the most strident and self-certain critics. By degrees, the ideas I thought were important started, instead of being sort of rejected out of hand, that's not the way we usually think about things, how could it be true? Suddenly, more and more people started to see them as possible, reasonable, worth thinking about. I didn't start out smart about any of these things, but by listening to others, I was able to strengthen my own thinking. In fact, the whole process has now convinced me that thinking is a social process. It depends on the inputs of others. Only through dialogue with others can we thoroughly think through an issue and all its nuances. That's why I think it's important for participants to organize their own topics. You have a genius about you that needs to be released. You can potentiate your genius by organizing topics on the edges of your understanding. Maybe you would need some help to get started. At the Thinking Society, Joe, I think Maritza, maybe David S., maybe even Maxine, I haven't talked to Maxine, she's here, can help you engage your germ of an idea to organize a session for Comprehensivist Wednesdays or at the Thinking Society. I know Sri Khan is busy. He's putting together all these sessions, so he needs presenters with ready-made topics. But maybe if we can organize a group of coaches and mentors, we can develop a pipeline of topics to feed to Sri Khan. And myself and these other Thinking Society experienced coaches and mentors and some 52 Living Ideas people, we can explore more people's ideas so that everyone's genius can be released. When you do this, it involves subjecting your topic, your baby, to the resistance and critique of others. That is hard. Sometimes it's excruciatingly hard. We always want our ideas to win the day, like in the movies. And if you're anything like me, you're going to be clumsy at first. But it works out. Each discussion moves things forward. For me, it took about 10 years to acquire sufficient complex of learning needed to become a confident comprehensivist. I needed to learn how to learn a lot of subjects, which my background was negligible. It required carefully listening to objections, questions, and critiques. I needed to pick myself up from my disappointments and try to imagine how to curate new topics to introduce context, values, ideas, perspectives that might help skeptics and others with their entrenched, conditioned reflexes to begin to see merits in other ways of thinking and being. But by engaging this process of applying curated ideas about important issues in our worlds to the continual feedback of others through listening, focused dialogue at the Thinking Society, I developed this confidence in my comprehensivity practice. If you start organizing curated explorations of the ideas and values important to you, you too can start to release your genius and help us all better understand aspects of the world that we may have overlooked. Both 52 Living Ideas and the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society need your ideas about what we should be exploring. Come, participate, and learn to accept your own genius.
Wonderful, CJ, and I second that wholeheartedly. I mean, the way in which I have structured all my meetups, actually, each person. See, first thing I have to say, this is something that I've always said in my in-person meetups. You get 10 times the value when you start presenting, because just the effort and action of trying to present your ideas, you get a lot. You get about 8 times the value of just trying to get that. And then people are going to give you feedback. And that is huge. That is huge. And these are really thoughtful people. So even when they critique you or they give kudos to you, you're going to learn something new, some aspects which are new. So I invite you. The other thing I would say is that the way I've structured each and every one of the meetups that happens every day is that you have 3 choices. You can come as an attendee. Second, you can become a panelist. And third, you can become a presenter. So panelist is an intermediate step. So if you don't want to fully take on the responsibility of presenting it, but you are willing to engage as a panelist, you're welcome to do that. And the interesting thing is that when we do breakout rooms, you're actually become a panelist in a small group. So it's scalable from attendee to panelist to presenter. So you're welcome anytime to be involved and actively involved as much as you would like. All right, so I'm going to talk about the problem that I've faced in doing the meetups is, I've been doing these meetups in New York City for the past 4.5 years now. And I've been getting 30 to 80 people every Saturday to come and talk. It's a very large community of people who keep coming back and lots of new people. And what I found, and the core of our interest is about human beings. So about psychology, philosophy, self-improvement, looking at every aspect of life. And what we found was that it was actually very difficult to talk to each other, in the sense that people kept using different terms, and developing some common knowledge or common vocabulary, common context, made it possible to keep increasing the depth and the breadth and the delicacy of discussions. For example, when we read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, that was a major step in the meetups. Idea of system 1 and system 2 actually is very profound. It's a very simple idea, but it's a very profound idea. So what I've been working on is that I've been trying to extend that. I'm saying, okay, what else do you need to be able to talk about all of human condition? And so based on the work of Carl Jung, partly Daniel Kahneman, and one of my favorite thinkers, Jacob Bronowski's insight, that we are both, his insight is that we are solitary and social at the same time. We are solitary in the privacy of our own mind. That's a very real part of us. We are individuals and we are social, and we can't miss either of the, if you don't have either of those parts, you suffer and you grow by, as Karen very beautifully put it, when you are afraid, you are holding like this. So you are neither expressing yourself fully nor connecting with others fully. When you lose the fear and develop kind of love of learning, you expand your own internal authenticity and expression and authentic connections to others. And it happens together. They are all connected. So what I've done is that I've kind of extended the model. I'm putting a link here to the playlist. I've done more than 9 meetups on this 4-function model. My current version of it is very simple. I think human beings actually do 4 things. Okay, now this is a radical simplification, okay? One is that we can visualize. We have the intuitive faculty. We have system 1, which brings together, which pulls together everything that we know in our heads to form a vision. So I'm simplifying that to kind of visualize, okay? Second, we can test. So this is our deliberative faculty. This is our system 2. This is our way of applying objective standards, of checking things against objective reality, whether our visions are correct or wrong, internally in our psyche. Both these are part of our psyche. And then there are 2 things that we do out in the world, in the social or the objective world. One is we plan. We look at who is going to do what, where, and when. It's all about planning, of kind of about transforming the world. And then we act. So it's visualize, act, plan, visualize, test, plan, and act. Those are my best words. I've kind of worked out. And the interesting thing I'm doing is that instead of sitting down and trying to work this whole thing out, taking a year or 2 to write a quote unquote perfect book, I just, as soon as I got this idea, I started doing meetups on it. So I've done more than 9 meetups, and I'm the 10th one, which each meetup, I like it better because I'm actually, each week I plan out what's the most ambitious way in which I can expand the model. And I do that. So the next meetup is this Monday, where I'm going to look at kind of the dynamics of individual variations in people, of their ability to, people differ in their ability to visualize, test, plan, and act. There is differences. And how do different people use this? And how do these different functions interact with each other? So it's the dynamism of that is what I'm going to do upcoming Monday at 9 o'clock. But I put a link to the playlist. I have more than 9 meetups already done, about 14 hours of presentations and discussions on this idea applied to many, many different things. So that's what I'm exploring. All right. So with that, now I'm going to open it up. I don't know, this has been so incredible, CJ. It's 11:15. The presentations, firstly, I want to say that I'm tremendously grateful, okay, for everybody who showed up, presented. Hopefully people who just listened this time will present. We'll be doing this again at the end of October. So I would encourage you to present at that time. But now I'm going to give a chance for people to ask questions to other people. Let's see how that works. You can go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to ask questions. Mike, your question is very specific. So according to your suggestion, please contact Willie. Okay, so Joe has a question for William. Jenny has a question for somebody. Try to keep your questions, both questions and answers, brief, okay? So let's actually, Mike, you can go ahead as long as the question is short and answer is short, that's fine. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I got kind of questions for almost everybody, but I settled on William because I have something specific that we've touched on Ray Dalio. I don't know if William's been to some of the other discussions. And Ray, he sounds like William. You sound like a Ray Dalio in the early stages, and I sent a message to you on the chat if you could I'd like to get your email offline, and is it on the website? I'll send you a message on the website.
Sure,
But
it's possible.
basically,
Yeah, it's possible to do private messages, so you guys can go
okay.
ahead and do that. Okay.
Basically, I'd say that Ray Dalio decided he couldn't do equities because they weren't very well behaved, and he settled on commodities and futures. And I just wonder if you have a short comment on that, and well, definitely consider this offline. I'm very interested in what you're doing.
I only trade equities, so I can't speak for Dalio. I don't really know him or what he is trying to do, but I only traded equities.
Wonderful. Next up is Joe. Joe, go ahead.
My question actually is for William as well, is the idea of the legal structure for the autodidactic islands. How do you accept new projects? Like, what's your criteria for new projects within that structure?
That's up to the members. So a lot of it is already part of the legal system. So if you go to, I'll put the link here. I actually wrote an entire essay on how the legal structure works, but it's very lawyerish. I don't know too many people that would be interested.
Thank you. Next up is Jenny. Jenny, go ahead.
Oh yeah, this is a question for Jeff. Jeff, why are some, numerous white people so threatened by Black people having equal rights? Is it just, it's not just the loss of, they're afraid of losing their white privilege, or is there something more? Just if you can address that a little bit, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Jeff, you need to unmute yourself. Yeah, go ahead.
So one among the things is just a fear of being blamed, a fear that somehow that I, as a white person, will be I mean, I can't think of a better word than blamed. It's so comprehensive in its way, and so it's tempting. It's seductive for me to feel defensive rather than curious and open and seeing the best outcome, looking for the best outcome, both for my relationship with somebody else as well as for myself in an enlightened kind of way. And so, I think it's probably a safety and trust and all those kinds of quality of relationship issue. I think that's really what it is. It just, that's what makes us fearful.
Okay, folks, I have questions for everybody, but I encourage you to ask questions. My question, and I will ask questions if you guys don't have questions, I will start asking questions. So, but please feel free to, you get priority over my questions. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I have another question actually for Gary this time. Has your experience with, with auctions impacted your thoughts on economics or politics at all?
It definitely is affected on economics, and one is realizing that the first opportunity to sell something is in a retail store that's very polished. The second opportunity is at auction, and somewhere very close to the auction price is the true value, because if it were that, then people would be showing up at auctions and buying things at bargains, but a lot of people shrug shoulders, sometimes with several hundred people bidding. They're normally not that large. And that tells you that the price that you pay for in a retail environment is the mystique, not the actual product. And that's something that I wouldn't have realized. And the other portion of that is the value that's instilled is very much in your mind when you watch clutters or closing of estates, the dramatic drop in value. Like a luxury car one where I went to auto auction was 98% drop in value. So $100,000 car was selling for less than a mid-sized sedan, exact same mileage. So why would somebody take a 98% hit versus somebody who's only taking a 75% hit. And that was an interesting revelation about what you're buying versus what you're getting. And not too much in the politics, other than there was some difficulty of the politics related to agricultural auctions with livestock. But I tried to stay out of that and still just understand what was going on. But I did read material about it.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary. My question is for Stella. Stella, it looks like you're very passionate about communities, and I'm sure you were involved in building in-person communities before this COVID hit, and now you're trying to build online communities. How do you see in-person communities as being different, or more precisely, how are online communities different from in-person communities by your perspective?
I think one benefit of the online community now with COVID is just that we can have anyone from anywhere now join. I think
sorry.
It was part of the experience. And so connecting to our bodies. Oh.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, can you hear me? So connecting to our bodies was always a huge part of the experience of my in-person meetups. So now that has to I have to translate that into our virtual connection of, how to connect to our bodies, and then how do we connect to each other.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. You froze for a second, so okay. Sorry to interrupt you. All right. Let's see. CJ, do you have a question for anybody?
Too many that aren't well enough organized.
Okay. All right. So let me go ahead. So let me ask with let me start with Deborah. So Deborah, you were very much interested in Mortimer Adler. You were actually hoping, because originally this was scheduled to be the Mortimer Adler one, but because I'm doing this, I'm giving every other meetup the preference, and I was eager to do this meetup. So tell me about your interest in Mortimer Adler.
Yeah, so I'm really interested in Mortimer Adler and the Great Books program, and I just think it's, I looked at his 1940s, like the first version of his How to Read a Book, and the tone, he was very cantankerous, and he was very strict, much stricter than the later version of that book. And I just am really interested in what he tried to do, but also the way in which the sort of more business environment in the US, I think, may have stopped him from doing everything he wanted. The thing that, and maybe you know the answer to this, I don't know, it's like I've been trying to understand, like the Great Books Foundation, which I think I know he was involved with, suggested that people spend maybe 2 hours a week or something reading, that you could read, these books in like 2 hours a week. But his, like, How to Read a Book, especially the 1940s version, he talks about how long it takes, like how much time it really takes to read these books. And so I've been trying to, I haven't come across yet, like it seems like there's a conflict there. And I don't know if he just felt like he had, because that's what was possible, or he wasn't as much a part of it. I guess that's like, it's been like a puzzle to me of like how to put together the How to Read a Book and what he says in that versus what the Great Books Foundation says.
Right. I think, I know a little bit about this. I'm a big fan of How to Read a Book. And the biggest application of that I have seen is his work of Syntopicon, which is the 2-volume, first 2 volumes of the Great Books, where he has actually condensed the thought of every thinker. So I would rather do, when I chose to do meetups, I chose to do the meetups just on Syntopicon. So I would take a different idea each week, and then we would cover what everybody said. about that idea. So that's like applying the how to read a book. So, but a very, very good question. Now you had a question for Maxine. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't know if you saw, it was just really interested in your story about, you know, childhood, about children should be seen and not heard. And I just wondered like what your experience was of how did you cope with that when, you know, you had ideas, like how did you cope with feeling like you should be seen and not heard?
I didn't have very much, I didn't have a problem with that because I wasn't allowed to play with anybody on the street. I lived in a very bad neighborhood and I was only allowed to play with the minister's daughter. There was a churchyard across the street and we would run through and jump in the baptismal pool and make ice cream out of snow. And we didn't speak very much. They were very controlled. They couldn't hear music or wear makeup or do anything. And that was who I was allowed to play with. So as far as other children, I couldn't express ideas. I had all the ideas in my head. I was allowed to read as many books as I wanted. I was allowed to play as much music. When I was bored, my mother would hand me another instrument and said, here, a new adventure. She swapped her bed for a bassoon, so I should play the bassoon. And I play almost every instrument because I was so bored. I needed, all right. But I didn't have any speech with anyone. My parents worked full time, and my grandmother, who didn't speak English, was my babysitter, and she taught me to cook, but she didn't speak very much. I tried to teach her the alphabet almost my whole life, but I couldn't. She was not receptive, so not very much speech was, yeah.
It's really interesting, and to think about like the music, you know, like turning to music. It's interesting.
Thank you, Maxine, and thank you, Deborah. Next up is, let me see. Next up is Joe. Joe, go ahead.
I have a really quick question for Brian, actually, and it was pertaining to where did you start to when you went to go learn about poetry and you went from just learning about it to being published? Where did you begin your exploration?
Brian, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, just a map. I'm not sure I can know fully how to answer this. I mean, I had an interest in poetry most of my life from early school days, and always had the desire that I would like to do this, but never found the time, never found the inclination really. When I found I had more time, I did a couple of online courses with someone in England, a poet in England, and she sort of taught the basics and then sort of gave us prompts to write poems for a few weeks. And after that, I've just sort of gone on from there, and I do my own sort of planning, my own development. The only problem I have with is editors. Apart from that, I just write as much as I can.
Brian, CJ had a question for you. CJ, go ahead.
Yeah, Brian, in your transition from the technical arts in your early career to the practice of the arts in your more recent efforts, have you noticed a significant distinction between the technical arts and the more artistic arts?
I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure how I should answer that. Of course, yes, there is a distinction, but it's basically the arts that I'm doing now, the sort of artistic arts, if you like, enable you to fully and indulge yourself in your own mind, in your own thinking, and where you want that to go. Whereas the technical hearts are very restrictive, very rigid in what you can do.
Thank you. I have a question for Jenny. Jenny, you're very much, I've known you for a long time. You're very much of a social person. And, you know, you're talking about the change in your life with COVID. So, and it looks like you are pursuing this kind of comprehensivist approach, probably even more with COVID. So how is it different before COVID and after COVID, pursuing this kind of comprehensivist approach?
Okay, well, it's continuing. I mean, I've always liked, you know, venturing into the unknown and learning, you know, and I've always been curious. So it's simply continuing. I am doing my art full time as an avant-garde performance artist and videographer. So I am able to do that full time now and communicating with a lot of different artists, you know, keeping in touch with friends. So everything is virtual primarily. My dog's here, I walk him twice a day, but I don't go anywhere, everything's delivered. And I just really wanted to say something. I think learning, well, you know, there are different subject matters and there are certain established authors, which is great. There's a whole, anything can be an entry point for learning. Like I'm interested now in non-binary culture because I've met people that are non-binary and I want to understand that. I've always been interested in drag culture, which is very celebratory. And especially now, I feel like we need more celebrations. So drag, I've always been in, you know, I mean, I've lived in the village. I was around a lot of gay people, around drag culture. But now, like, you know, it's very important to have some celebratoriness right now. So learning more about Gen Z, right? They're a very powerful group, you know, coming up, they're the future. Women philosophers, we never talk about them. I mean, I'm doing my own research from the Renaissance. You know, maybe I'll do a group. I don't know, I'm very busy right now. But there are women, a whole slew of women philosophers that are never talked about. From the Renaissance all the way to contemporary philosophers. There is Slavoj Žižek, who's like a hoot to listen to in terms of his. We don't talk about, you know, there's postmodernism. I know it's kind of old hat. So, and the idea of the unknown and learning. So what's happening, it's just more of a concentration of what I've already been doing, but I am also literally doing one of the hardest things is confronting myself. You know, in bite-sized pieces, because now there's isolation. So anyway, I'm grateful for it. Yeah, in some respects, it's very hard, but I'm actually, there's so much growing happening right now that I'm grateful for it. I want it to be over, but you know, I'm grateful for, you know, it's given me, the pandemic is a teacher right now for me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. I'm going to give preference to, just a second. Okay, if anybody has questions, your questions take priority over mine. So you can go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Jean, you often talk about your children and you often talk about your experience of raising children. And what is it that, you know, you talk about different values, different things you learned in the process of raising children. Could you talk a little bit more about that? What have you learned? What have you learned? How is your life richer? How do you understand philosophy better? How do you understand life better as a result of raising children? Oh, looks like Jean is not here. Jean, are you there? All right, so we'll go to the next one. Mike, you said that you ask questions to some people. You can go ahead and choose one person and ask them a question.
I sent messages to several people, and other people have sent messages to several people, and I think everybody's so immersed in the elegance of the speech that they're not looking at chat. And my email address is privately sent to several of you.
Sure. So, Mike, because the voice is very immersive, you can go ahead and ask the question in voice. One question to anybody.
Well, my questions were just to talk to people specifically. All right. Okay. One of the general questions, which may be a little bit sensitive, is to Jeff Nugent. The discussion about white privilege is somewhat a two-way street, and dimension. There are two more things that there are several more things that ought to be considered. That in the area of anger management and in the area of equal opportunity rather than equal outcomes. And I recognize your mission was probably to defuse the situation, and some of those things may not defuse the present situation, but to get an ultimate solution, we likely need to work on additional dimensions of this. Any comments?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. Those are excellent. You know, this is such a both rich and challenging subject that taking as large and multidimensional approach to it as is possible, you know, whether it's within oneself and the emotions that are there, or the mental constructs we have, what we're actually thinking and feeling, and what we're conscious of and unconscious of in our relationships with each other, what our expectations are, you know, what our fears are, what our resentments, founded and unfounded, all of those things, and then are really very significant. And then building upon it, though, the temptation is most common to reduce the conversations about racism to kind of people's orientations to themselves and their interpersonal relationships with each other. And there's a lot to be gained by going to these higher levels of institutional, systemic, and structural racism in a society as well. And they're often missed because we just aren't we often are not that informed or educated to really be able to see and clearly discuss those additional dimensions. But all the things you were raising, I think, are excellent and important, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff.
Can I add one more point?
Okay, very briefly, please.
The underlying thing on some of these things is poverty, and several people have talked about technology and AI has made the divide, the technological divide, the poverty divide, almost unbridgeable for both, for all races and all people immersed in poverty. And if that problem were solved, it's likely to get worse as everything from driverless cars to how we earn money. Because would you want a brain surgeon operating on you who is using instruments, or would you like one who's using microsurgery and a computer and AI to do that kind of stuff? Now, heart surgery is done as a computerized situation, and with the doctor sitting at a console.
Thank you, Mike. Jean, I'd asked you, you typed exclamation mark. I don't know whether you heard my question or you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I heard your question. Sorry, I was putting things away from Costco. They're letting me, so I couldn't find my phone.
Okay.
So anyways, so sorry, I forgot what exactly.
Yeah, so the question was, you've often talked about your experience of raising children and how that has helped you become a better person or understand things about life that you did not understand before. So can you talk a little more about that, about what have you learned? How are you a better person as a result of raising your children?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think Jordan Peterson said, you know, like a lot of time we forget to take medicine because we don't take care of ourselves. I think part of the reason maybe we are not as sick as somebody else. Like my son, the reason I get into this nutrition program, learn so much about nutrition, because my son has severe allergy, and he's short, you know, skinny. And I tried different ways. I went to a mountain in China near Wuhan to see the Chinese doctor last summer before the corona. So when it happened in Wuhan, I was, oh my God, I visited that last year. And then finally found this nutrition program. And I found, you know, there's so much science in there. So I think part of the reason when you are not as sick, you will not go into the depths. That's why I understand, you know, when actually pain, because I think I'm pretty healthy myself. So I never really look into health so deep before, because you take it for granted. You don't have to take extra care of yourself. But because my children need more attention, actually through that, I get much healthier myself by learning about the food. Same thing about, it's just amazing. I have this revelation I found, you know, how we connect to the past through connection with our parents, and how we connect to the future through a connection with our kids. Because my son, I actually trained him to a private school recently because I learned he may have ADHD. I read so many books on that. I realized the private school may help him. And he has very high IQ, but he's also very stubborn. But on the way, he play all this music. He laughs. And I get to learn all these new songs. I never will be able to, because I found it's quite interesting. We all stuck. Everybody appreciate music at a certain age, and you kind of live in that period for your music a lot of times. So it's just amazing how through him I connect to the future, learn all about this new songs. And it's just like so much things. And also because of the try to motivate my older son, I get into Landmark and I learn so much about self-development. It's just a lot of time you will do more for the others, for your kids especially, than for yourself. Then you end up actually developing yourself more. So I actually found a lot of very intelligent people who did choose not to have kids. I think it's a pity because we need, and at the same time, very educated people, they have lots of kids. So it's like, if you want to make the world better, have kids, educate them well, let them make more difference in the future. I think all the group people here are so intelligent. Everybody have some kids and help the world make it better.
Thank you, Jean. Next up is Maxine, followed by Deborah. Maxine, go ahead.
I wanted to ask about the nutrition. Did the nutrition help your children, or have they outgrown it, or are they still living with these allergies?
Well, we just started for 2 months. Actually, I always suspect his allergy is related to his gut health. And we actually did this testing and found out he actually is sensitive to a lot of things, like that make my challenging for my cooking, like rice, gluten, wheat, eggs. So I learn right now, trying to learn gluten, dairy, egg, free, vegan cakes. So that's what I'm trying to make, and bread. So,
okay.
At the same time, they try to use supplement. Once you stop those sensitive food, then they use supplement to fix your gut. So the gut is leaking right now. That's why they get into the blood. They create all this sensitivity.
You have to try every 4 days a different food and see.
Yeah, that's afterwards. Yeah, that's
Because
after fix your gut.
yeah, because my son was very allergic and lived for 4 years on lamb, green beans, and distilled water. And that is, that was all he wasn't allergic to, but it worked. And he finally outgrew it. So find the foods, don't just poo-poo it. Find the foods that your son is allergic to and follow the program.
Thank you, Maxine, and thank you, Jean. Next up is Deborah. You have a question for Brian.
Yeah, so Brian, I was really just amazed and impressed that you write a poem a day. And I wanted to understand, is it sort of like a warm-up, that they're like practice poems, or is this a method that could lead to, you know, any of those poems eventually becoming, you know, you go back to these and maybe some of these start out as an idea that end up in publishing your poetry?
Okay, it's the reason I do it, how I do it, is to make sure that I keep the flow going. So I have the flow in the writing all the time. I also write 2 hours a day in creative writing as well. So I've got that flow. For poetry, for poems, I write a poem a day and I try to make it as complete as possible. But what I found in any type of writing, but certainly in poetry, you write a poem one day and you make it as good as you can. 2 days later, you wonder what the hell you were doing. Why was it like that? So you go back and edit it. You do that 2 or 3 times and you got something which is realistically worth showing to somebody else. So that's the reason I do it.
Thank you, Brian. Next question is from Joe.
So my question is for you, Shrikant. In the four systems model, who would be your ideal prototype or first client for that model?
Well, the way I think about it, I mean, this is like, I always think of it this is just a very odd way of thinking, but I always think of 2050 as a goal. And because by that time we'll have about 10 billion people. And I'm trying to say, like, when you look at that, like look at 10 billion people, 2050. So it's not an immediate thing. It gives you enough time to say, okay, if I want to make some impact, make the world better at that point, what do I need to do? And so what I'm hoping to do with this is to make it possible for people to understand each other, to be saying, okay, this is where I'm coming from. This is where you're coming from. This is where the difference is. And give like very simple tools for people to talk to each other. Because I think amazing things become possible when people are actually able to connect to each other. I think there is a lot of kind of crosstalk that goes on where people have this entire system, which is kind of isolated from rest of the world. And they have their own, it could be like ideologies, or it could be kind of idiosyncratic ideas that each person holds, but they're not easily able to kind of connect to even the same idea expressed differently. So that's what I'm hoping to do. So that, you know, so I have 10 billion people that I think of when I'm trying to do that. Okay, let me see. All right, so we're coming to close to 11:30. So I want to tell you about what's coming up. Okay, we have some amazing meetups coming up. All right, so let me first tell you about the Comprehensivist Wednesdays. So the next one, we're going to have a researcher called Michael Araki presenting on the power of polymaths. He's been doing a lot of work with Angela and Ruth Bernstein and various other people. And he has some very good ideas about the power of polymaths. So he's going to be doing a full presentation on that. That's going to be next Wednesday. The Wednesday after that, I'm going to be talking about Mortimer Adler and the Syntopicon and the Great Books project, of what it does and what it has done for me. The week after that, it's going to be CJ, and he's going to be talking about Buckminster Fuller's ideas. CJ will talk a little bit more about it as well. The week after that, Sanjay is going to be back, and he's going to be talking about neuroscience and mindfulness. He's developing this entire series on neuroscience, and the way we are approaching it is that we want to make everybody kind of literate about neuroscience, at the same time connect it to issues that we face as human beings. So it's kind of psychology and neuroscience together. So the next one is going to be on mindfulness. The one after that, we're going to go back to doing these lightning talks. I just simply loved this meetup. Okay, it's really great to have this level of sharing. So I'm going to go back to that. Starting November, Angela, who was done a PhD on studying polymaths in the 21st century. She's doing a series of 10 meetups, and she's going to get different guests and different people in the polymath community to come and talk. So that's going to be on Sundays, starting November 1st, every other Sunday. Then I have got a new series with my friend Michael on philosophical calendar. That's going to be on Sundays, starting this Sunday at 12:30. It's a very interesting concept because human beings go through different phases. We have different aspects, and every culture has grappled with that. And one of the ways in which they have actually dealt with it is to develop different rituals and different holidays and different celebrations throughout the year. So what he has done is that he has looked at correlations between different holidays and different emotions and different philosophies, different virtues, and he has this entire series based on that. So it's going to be a weekly series starting this Sunday on that. There is another series that's starting up on thinking, different thinking tools, with organization called clearthinking.org that actually makes tools to improve your thinking. And that's going to be on Saturday, starting this Saturday at 1 o'clock. So these are some of the things coming up. CJ, you want to talk about the Bucky lecture you're doing?
Yeah, so October 14th is right now, if you read the event description, it's focused on like a book discussion on Buckminster Fuller's operating manual for Spaceship Earth. I'm inviting people to take the challenge to read that book, but I'm planning to make the topic inviting to people who don't have time to read the book. And I'm probably going to change the title to something like Comprehensive Thinking of Bucky Fuller. And, the whole book has lots of little stories that, we could talk about for months. I'm going to pick up on two of the very big themes in the book. One is his system of comprehensive thinking, and two is how that works to making the whole world work and how the world works as a regenerative landscape. But, those of you who enjoy reading books, if you read the event description, there's links to online copies. You can probably purchase it through your favorite bookseller. There must still be lots of copies, although I think it's out of print right now. So, yeah, and maybe
CJ, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Maybe it's too late, but I put in a question in chat for you, Shrikant, wondering if your one, visualize is phenomenology, two, system two is interpretation, three, planning is futurism, imagination, and four, acting is doing.
It's slightly, what are these 1, 2, 3, 4? Is there a particular source you have, or these are?
That's yours. One is visualize, two is
Right,
test, three
right.
is
So
plan,
for
that.
me, kind of the best way to kind of map it onto something else is Carl Jung's ideas. So for me, visualization is mostly intuition, or system one kind of automatically, not even system, I think intuition captures it best, of being able to kind of wordlessly, almost visually pulling together and projecting what is possible. Yeah, so that's kind of, that's how I see the first one. The second one is very much of kind of testing. It's kind of deliberation. I've struggled with these terms, by the way, because it's like you're trying to grab onto this entire system and way of doing with just one word. And finally, I've settled on these. Instead of visualization, I call it viz. So it's like viz, test, plan, and act, just one syllable things. And I'm kind of running it against different systems and trying to come up with it. But yeah.
So what I was saying is, one, that visualize for me feels like phenomenology, how to take all of our sensory and parsing, mental parsing, brain kind of parsing into, as you say, a visual. And I believe in philosophy that's called phenomenology. And the system two, the deliberative, in my way of thinking, that's interpretation. And three, your planning, I think of as futurism and imagination, and acting and doing are synonyms, so there's not much difference there. But on the first three, my interpretation of your fourfold system might be worth thinking about.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll think about it, and so it's always. I mean, the other thing is that I like this as a model. I mean, I would be actually petrified doing this about 10 years ago, but I've gotten so much from my meetups of being kind of openly talking about your ideas and being open to feedback, because I think that's the fastest way to grow. It's been amazing. Like several people, I do diagrams, like about a dozen people have sent their own versions of diagrams back, and they've commented, and I continuously try to incorporate as much as I can. So it just kind of accelerates the process. And I recommend it heartily to everyone, of just, speak. Like one of my friends puts it, you speak from the top of your ideas, your best ideas, just go ahead and put it out in the world. And you will actually get a lot back, more back than you imagine, because we are social beings. So social solitary, it's like, instead of just remaining solitary or just remaining social, be social solitary. So think of the highest things you can imagine in the privacy of your own head, and then just put it out in the world, and then listen very closely to what you get back, and then make your own decisions. You don't have to listen to anybody, but you make your own decisions. So I definitely recommend that very much. All right, folks. So again, I'm tremendously grateful to each and every one of you to be here, that you're here. Each of you kind of added so much. And so I'm definitely going to keep doing this every month. So please prepare for the next one. If you want to do a more elaborate presentation, you're always welcome to do it. Please message me or CJ, and we'll be happy to put one together for you. All right, folks. So thank you very much, and good night, everybody. Bye.
Bye.